And people starting to filter in. We will get started shortly. Good morning or good afternoon, depending on which part of the country you're in. We will get started very soon. Another 30 seconds and then we will begin. Hey, Geneva, coming to all of our webinars. Well, not all, but at least the last two that I remember. Welcome back.
And I recognize Bridget. She was in a training yesterday about AI integrations. So hi, Bridget.
Nice. All right, so some logistics. Let's get rolling. There is a chat associated with this webinar. You can ask any questions you want in the chat. Yeah, that should be at the bottom of your screen. Just a quick note on Zoom, it does this weird thing where by default, often by default, it will message only the host and panelists. And if it's something where you would rather interact with the community in the webinar, you just got to change that to be, I believe, all participants. So weirdness of chat in Zoom that I've seen before. And then we are recording this. So we will be sending out a recording after the fact. And we're going to strive to get all of this done in 30 minutes. But sometimes we talk too much, so we'll do our best. But hang out as long as you'd like. We'll cover it, and then questions are key. So get your questions into the chat, or if you want to use the Q&A pod because you don't want your name publicly associated with a question, that's totally fine as well. Quick introductions. My name is Marcus. I'm one of the owners of Harmonize, and I have with me Alex, who is our instructional designer and more of the expert on social annotations than I. Today we're going to be running through two things. We're going to run through social annotations around PDF annotations as well as polling. And we're going to do this. The two of these are grouped together because we're really trying to elevate content consumption in some way. And so to sort of frame this for you in some research, there's this framework out of ASU, and I will drop the, if you're a person that likes to read research papers and such, I will drop it into the chat. But it's this framework called the ICAP framework. It's this idea of whether you're doing passive activities, active activities, or all the way through to like interactive activities, and how does that impact learning outcomes? So there's if you want some deep reading, it's off in the chat now, but the idea is basically the more you can get your students to not just passively consume information, but to interact with each other in an activity or in some way when you are doing anything related to content, they're going to retain that better. The outcomes are going to be more positive. I don't remember the exact numbers, but the numbers like 8 to 12% pop into my head. I'd have to go back and look at the paper to see exactly what it is, but they saw a noticeable improvement when you're trying to bring in some more interactivity into your elements. And so what we're going to focus on today are how do we take a static, what would be a passive reading, PDF, how do we bring that into the class, and then how do we make that more of an active or an interactive level element so that when they are doing that reading, they maintain more, they retain more, they learn more as they're going through it. And then we're going to touch on towards the end a little bit about polling and how to use polling to kind of just add a little bit to content consumption as well. That doesn't get all the way to the interactive side of things, but it does get to the active side of things because they are presented a question as they're consuming content and they have to answer it. Without further ado, I'm going to anchor us with just a quick demo of what PDF annotations means, what it looks like in Harmonize, so you can have this in your head. And then we're going to take a step back and talk about some of the different activity types. And this is where I'll hand it over to Alex because she's a former, I guess, English composition. What was it, Alex?
Both, a little bit of both,
A little
mostly
bit of both.
composition, but a little English too.
Yeah, so she both has helped instructors with this, but she's also used this in her classroom. So she's going to do a little more of the theory of the types of things you can ask for, and I will focus on more of the demo side. So Um, so you may be familiar with tools in the space. The main two that work in this space outside of Harmonize are Hypothesis and Perusal. So if you've used either of those tools, same general idea of what we are doing in Harmonize, and the same concepts are going to apply. So if your school has access to one or two of those, or Harmonize, then it's kind of your choice of which tool you use to do this as you're going into it. And so in a nutshell, we call social annotations also PDF annotations. That's because our tool only annotates PDFs. Those other two tools can do a broader range of things like text, digital textbook annotation and stuff. That's sort of outside of scope of what Harmonize does. But the idea is you as the instructor upload a PDF, and then you give your students a series of tasks that you want them to complete. And then they go in and highlight the document and have a whole sidebar conversation around whatever it is that they are doing. So that can be, in this case, I'm making snarky comments about the budget of the US government, topical for today. Don't forget to go vote. And then also we can drop pins on things that are not inherently text-based. The idea is that I could just ask my students to read this budget of the US government, and then we're going to talk about it in a discussion after the fact, but they are going to retain the content more if they have a task. If they have some interactivity. And so this may be your standard. I want them to highlight something that's confusing to them or ask questions about it and respond to each other. And then they can come through and read the text and see what other people have asked and what other people have responded to. And so the text becomes a living document where the conversation is happening embedded inside of the text. So without further ado on what it actually looks like, I'm going to now pass it over to Alex. And Alex, have you talked through some of the different strategies you've seen, some of the different ways to use social annotations in a class?
Yeah, I love that you said it turns it into a living document. I think that's a great way to explain it because at a glance, it seems like, oh, we're just annotating a text together. But there's something really powerful about the fact that it's truly social, that you can see other people's annotations and reply to them, and that they appear right alongside the text as though they're right in the margins of the text. It really is like you're starting with a document, but then you as a class are sort of constructing around it and constructing a new document. It's a very cool thing. So the main application for this, probably the main place I've seen instructors using this is anyone who already has a lot of PDF readings in their class. That probably seems terribly obvious, but I think we don't always realize how many folks have classes that rely heavily on PDF readings because so many of our graduate level classes have students reading articles, and those articles are really dense. And to be able to make the reading active and social is huge. You shared that article about at the beginning about interactivity, and it is really amazing what happens when you take this passive activity that happens normally out of sight and turn it into something that is engaging and collaborative. So the other thing I would say about this is it is particularly helpful when you want students to have a discussion that is rooted in the text, but you don't want them to have to do a lot of laborious, like, you know, quote 5 times and remember to cite and use this style of citation. Something like your discussions can get very stilted when you're trying to have students like do that kind of work. When you use social annotation, it really helps them have a discussion that's closely rooted in the text, but without all of that laborious citation work. So in terms of like what specific kind of activities you can do with it, anything where you're wanting them to dig closely into the language is good. Anything where they're reading something challenging and you just really need them to focus on it is good. In terms of what specific stuff you might assign, because that's a question we see sometimes too, right? Like, well, I want them to annotate, but like, what do I tell them to do? What instructions do I give them? Um, it can depend a lot on what you want them to do with the reading, but some very good basic things are like, just ask them to post a question, just like they would maybe in a normal discussion. I often liked to ask my students to pose a question to each other about the text and then see. It was really fun to see when they posted a question and everyone dived in on it. Uh, or I would say, if you want to, that can actually be a question to the author or to me. And that was really great too, because sometimes they would be confused and we could clarify things right there in the discussion. Another one I love to do would be to ask students to just point to something, like state something they agreed or disagreed with and why. Students love to get their opinions out there. And for me, this was a stealth way to find out what their understanding of the article actually was. Because in order to agree or disagree with something, you have to state what you think the author's position is. And so this was a really great way for me to sort of find those misunderstandings, but in a way that wasn't so confrontational, right? Because if you ask students, I want you to summarize the author's 3 key main points, that feels very like, oh no, there's a right or wrong answer, and I'm very stressed about it. So it's nice to be able to unveil those maybe common misconceptions in a less stressful way. The other thing I always really like to ask was, what's one connection maybe that you can make? And you can specify like that you want it to be to something else they've read in the class, something else they're reading that week, or it could be, a connection to personal life or a different class or something they've learned elsewhere. We know that when students make connections between what they're learning now and what they already know, that really strengthens the new learning and helps them integrate that new knowledge. So, if you want to, you can just say, I want these 3 annotations: connection, question, agree, disagree, and why. And then, have them respond to a couple. And it's so fun to see them answer each other's questions, extend each other's connections, and maybe even like have a little bit of a debate about those agree, disagree points. So, uh,
I want to jump
yeah.
back to one of your earlier points and provide some examples I'd heard. So it's like when you're reading something complicated. I've heard 3 different cases of this. One is reading research papers, and actually having them call out where they get lost, because frankly, when I'm reading research papers, I get lost. At some point, I get bogged down in the language, or I don't understand the point they're trying to make, or the graphs are not as illustrative as I'd like them to be. So like you can drop a pin on that, you can highlight in different sections and say, okay, I don't get where they went here, or maybe I got bogged down at this point, and to see how far you can actually make it through. I've also seen the same thing done with lawyer contracts. So if you're in law school and or you're doing something that is complicated to read and you really need to focus on the nuance and the detail, to be able to critique it that way. I mean, this is a similar thing you would do in a real office setting with a Google Doc, or if you're using Word, same idea. Being able to highlight and have a conversation around it, but we're doing it inside the class, inside the LMS. And I said 3, and then the third one actually just disappeared from my head of what the complicated thing was. So maybe we'll call it 2. I'll edit history and say 2 of them. But think about what is the complicated stuff that you worry your students are getting bogged down in when you assign a reading, and how can you just give them sections of it, even of like, hey, read the first 3 pages of this, or however long you want them to go, and give them very explicit instructions. Like I have the instructions collapsed on this one, but I gave them very specific instructions I wanted what them to do, as well as a video to give a little instructor presence into what I'm after. Why am I having them read this document? Why is this document important? How does this relate to the learning outcomes we're trying to do? And then I threw a poll in here just because we're talking about polling as well, so I can ask them a quick question on what they're doing. So okay, back to you, Alex. I'd heard a couple examples like that. I wanted to anchor those into.
Yeah, I think that's great getting down into specific examples, especially from different disciplines. I worked with an instructor once who was teaching teachers, and so they were reading a lot of pedagogical articles, and it was really helpful for them to be able to get in and make sure they understood those articles really closely.
And
Um,
you did it with poetry analysis, right?
Yes, although I only did it with poetry once. I usually did it with academic articles. But I did do it with a poem once, and I had them highlight specific parts of the poem, like little specific lines or words, and think about what those meant. So yeah, and that was very effective. So if you're having them read literature and really want them to dig in, that's great. Poems are a particularly good example of this because it's easy to find or make PDFs of them, poems and short stories. Um, the other thing, I don't know if this is maybe the third example you were thinking of, but maybe in a slightly different direction, rather than something that's super difficult, it's just something you really want them to read that they normally don't read. And that could be, for example, like your syllabus or a really difficult assignment. So this is something I've seen too before, where people will take the syllabus, or maybe you have a major research paper that's unfolding over the course of the whole year. You can take that assignment, turn it into a PDF, and actually have them as a minor like build up assignment for a few points, annotate that, add questions, add comments, respond to each other. And that really focuses them on reading it. And, in a live class, we'll often like be like, okay, we're assigning this paper now and we're going to talk about it for 20 minutes. How do you do that online? That's in a way that's not just me talking at you for 20 minutes. Being able to turn that into an annotation activity can be a really cool way to do it.
It was the rubric idea I was thinking of, to where it's like you can actually upload the rubric for an assignment, turn around and make sure that the students understand what the rubric's asking them to do, especially if it's like a capstone project where it's the big end of year, you have to understand what we are trying to achieve here. Let's go through and actually take a look at the assignment, take a look at the rubric, and make sure that we're all on the same page before we roll into finishing it.
Or even better, like have the rubric and also have a sample assignment, right? And have them
Mm,
annotate the sample assignment and maybe even talk about how the rubric applies to the sample assignment. We know students learn a lot from looking at samples. This is a way to get them to look at a sample together, with or without a rubric, and comment on that sample. Um, I think you can get a lot of mileage out of that kind of activity.
um, we're at about 15 minutes. Actually, Alex, did you have more sort of theory side things to cover, or should I roll into a little more to do?
I think that's it as far as this theory side. It might be great to just show people how you would set it up in Harmonize. And for if there's anyone here who doesn't have Harmonize, like you said, a lot of this can be done in something like Google Docs. The real advantage choosing Harmonize is that it's going to have that nice grading pass back. Make it easier for you to keep track of, did you actually do the 3 comments I asked you to do, that kind of thing.
For sure. And let me find this one here so I can just talk about it in terms of Canvas, because a couple of the folks I recognize are from Canvas schools here. You can make these graded or ungraded. If you make them graded, we will give you an overview of what happened in the actual class. So we'll load it up and show you what it is that Edith actually said. We can go take a look at it in document and see what it is, whether she did post her comments, what the overview of how much she's done has been. And then you can assign a grade in it. And the same thing is true outside of Canvas and other things. They don't have to be graded, but once again, when there's a grade attached, students often do things a bit more thoroughly as well. So you can get to this into a grading view and actually assign grades to it, which then encourages them to actually do it. A quick note on features, a lot of people have used this and started asking for grouping. I noticed, Geneva, you do a lot of group work in your classes. That is being actively worked on right now and will be ready rolling into the spring semester, maybe just past the start of the spring semester. So proceed with caution if you need it for groups, but you can then break your students into groups of 3 or groups of 5 and have them approach this in the same way. So if you have a large class, if everybody wanted to highlight the same sentence, it's going to get quite busy. So that you can actually then come in and be like, well, let's make it private. And we're going to have you actually do your own note taking and answer your own questions. So it's not social, but it's still active. Those types of things are coming in Harmonize. So you'll be able to limit those down as well as you go. When you're adding one of these to the class, you do it in the exact same way you do a harmonized discussion. So looking at the list, I think everyone is a harmonized customer here. When you're adding this, you can either create a placeholder assignment, or if you don't want to do it ungraded, you go straight to external tool and pick harmonize. And either way, whereas you would normally pick discussion for what you probably began with harmonize, it's just another item here that says PDF annotation. And when I pick that, it's actually going to ask me to give it a title, add the PDF that I, as the instructor, am choosing for them to annotate, and then go ahead and create it. Those are the only steps necessary. Once again, when you jump in, we will then drop you straight into an instruction mode for you to put in what instructions you want. I can't stress this enough, give specific details of what you want the students to do. Because if you just ask them like, hey, read it and annotate as you see fit, they're probably, maybe they'll do something, maybe you have an amazing class, but explicit instructions do wonders for them there. So pretty straightforward, literally a name, a file, grade it or not, and then set it up and you're good to go. Close this out. Any questions for us on social annotations before we roll into polling a little bit to talk about how do we add some not interactivity, but how do we add some activity, some constructive activity into polling?
I think I do see a couple things in the Q&A here.
Oh, I
Um,
missed it.
how do you create an assignment for annotation in a PDF? We just showed that, so I think we're good. Oh, answered. Thank you. That was it. We got you.
Um, awesome. So yeah, so pretty straightforward. And if I were actually creating an assignment, the only additional steps I would have done were to create a graded assignment, set it up, and give it a name here, a PDF annotation. And then when I go through that process, I'm hooking it up via external tool. And it's different for every LMS, but looks like all of you are familiar with Harmonize and external tools. So just don't pick discussion, pick PDF annotation and go with it. And it has very similar tools to what you'll see in terms of being able to do video instructions and whatnot. Right. Let's go into some polling ideas. So we have multiple levels of polling, and it's all multiple choice. It is all no correct answer. It's a poll. So the students can answer as they see fit. And you can do them as graded or ungraded. You can lace them into discussions. In the context of this ICAP framework, though, I want to cover an example where we are intermixing content we want the student to consume with an element of activity with some polls that are associated to that content. So for example, in the Spanish class, I have them listening to a YouTube video, and then I have a bunch of poll questions, one of which I've already answered, so I can see the results, one of which I haven't answered yet. And so you can take content and interleave them with poll questions, record a video, put a PDF, give them a web link, just whatever you need to do. All the harmonized tools are there to be able to author content. One of those tools is to be able to lace poll questions in. The idea here is that we want the students to think about something when they're consuming this. We want them to focus on some aspect of what we're doing. How do we do that other than to say, well, let's go have a discussion about the content after the fact? Instead, we can be like, maybe these 3 poll questions before you dive in. These are the instructions. Look at the poll questions because that's what I want you to think about when you're consuming this content. And then they can press play on the YouTube video, come down and answer the questions as they're going. So they are actively thinking about what they need to answer. Keep in mind, no correct answer on these. So I asked what tense the speakers were using. Everybody has answered present tense because that was, probably correct. But maybe there would have been a mix, and maybe there was in fact only present tense used, and half the students didn't get that. It's important for you to know as an instructor. Yeah, they didn't. Either they just didn't listen and guessed, or they didn't understand. Either way, important for you as an instructor to know the content has not been consumed and understood at the level that you were hoping it for. And then what do you do as you're rolling into a discussion or a Zoom session, or if you're doing a full synchronous class, what do you do when they get into class as well? Because all of these are not necessarily purely online activities. They can be homework activities, they can be out of class activities before you come back into the session together. Like I said, in terms of grading and not, these can be graded. The way that grading works is it's automatic. If you assign 3 points to this assignment when you set it up, they're going to get 1 point for every question they answer because I had 3 questions in here. And so this person, myself, got 2 points out of 3. I haven't answered the third. Like I said, no correct or incorrect answer, but it gives them both a due date for the reading, it gives them a grade associated with the reading, and points that they will then pursue, and it gives them something to think about. And I keep saying reading, but in this case, it's listening, so it doesn't have to be just reading. This is not interactive, so you don't get the same level of outcome boost that you get from social annotations in this regard because the students aren't interacting with each other. If this would be more of an active activity where they are actually having to actively think and answer a question, but it's not interacting with their peers. So better than passive, but not as good as interactive, but there's a time and place for those when you're going through them.
Can I jump in? I feel like there is a slight interactivity to it, if only because they can see how other people have answered. Like
Fair.
this is what's cool, I think, about this polling feature versus something like you can, in most of the LMSs, you can set up an ungraded survey and survey your students. But usually when students do that, they're not going to see like what the answers of the rest of the class are. And so the thing that makes this like gives it that little bit of interactivity is that they click and they can see, oh, I answered present tense and like 80% of the class answered that. So I'm pretty sure that is right. Or like, oh, only 20% answered past and I answered past. So I suspect that's wrong, but I know I'm not alone in being wrong. Um, I'm so
Which is important.
serious. It is important. No,
No,
it
it is.
is
Yeah.
because I used to use polls a lot in Zoom when I was doing like synchronous classes. And students, once they know they're not the only person with the misconception, they feel much more comfortable asking questions about it. And so I think being able to see actually at a glance how other students have answered in the class is really helpful. And it opens you up to asking questions too that aren't just like content questions. You can ask questions like, have you learned about this tense in a past Spanish class? Or like, in which situation would you maybe want to use this? I don't know. You can like come up with, or how do you feel about this concept? Are you feeling good or bad about this concept? And then just see how your students are feeling about it. So again, like asking those kinds of questions, and then they can see how other people in the class are feeling. Um, and can be a nice way, I think, to create some of that. Maybe if not interactivity, at least engagement, as you're
I mean, it
saying.
might be. I don't know. That would be a question for the researchers of does this count
What
into
is
the
the
trigger the same
true
level
definition? Yeah,
yeah, of interactivity mean?
of
Um,
interactivity.
Before I forget, a question came into the Q&A that I want to come back and answer around social annotations. Does annotation have the same capability as Harmonize for individual, i.e. just the instructor and student, or group discussions? Today, no. It is actively being worked on, and they told me maybe by the start of spring, if not real soon, after the beginning of spring, you will be able to go into the settings and crank it down to either private, group, in Canvas section, and full class discussion as well. So it depends on when you're going to use it. If you're going to use it into the couple modules of your spring semester, you should be good to go. If you're going to use it like next week, then no, don't dive in to get it going there. All right, so something Alex touched on, which I want to come back to, is it's kind of like this feeling of feedback from your students. Am I lost or not? That is another level of polling that can be used. I am showing you polling laced directly into my modules with some content. So this one was here in my module about Spanish. They launch in directly from here. You can attach polls to harmonized discussions as well. And I'm hearing this more and more, especially from some of the LACCD crew. I think Wendy over there has been promoting this idea, and others have been picking it up, which is like you always want to know how your students feel about something. So if you create a discussion activity for them here and it's got all kinds of stuff in it, you can actually ask them a poll question as a lead into the discussion. Or as a follow on to the end, like come back after you're done and tell me, how did you feel about this particular discussion? So that when they're participating, they come back to it and be like, hated that one or loved that one, whatever the case may be. And she says she does get varying feedback from that, and others have shared the same, to where it's like this great touch point of like, I care that you care about this content. So express your opinion here. Go participate first in the activity, or however you want to frame it. Or how are you feeling about the content? Are you confident in the content rolling into this discussion? And so if a lot of students say no, you know you need to be more active in that discussion, because the students are going to be a little lost maybe. And so it's maybe a place where you need to spend a little more time, because the initial poll 3 days in shows that most of them are feeling very uncomfortable with the content. And so then there's going to be a lot of facilitation needed to keep them on track. So they can be
That
laced
is,
into topics.
sorry, I was just going to say that is such a great point. I think one of the things we really struggle with as teachers when we move from teaching live to teaching online is the loss of this kind of casual feedback. Like when I go into a live class and I start leading a discussion and my students are really confused, I know immediately, like I can tell immediately. Or like if I've done an activity with them, I can tell if they liked it or not. But it's a lot harder to tell online when people are confused. It's a lot harder to tell if people liked something or not. And so those kinds of like, we don't even realize we're doing it, but those check-ins that we just do casually and inadvertently in a live class when we're online, we need to be like a little more purposeful about. But then once we have those check-ins, it can be so helpful for our teaching.
Yeah, and then sort of dovetailing on that, I quickly navigated to this, but here is another example of a poll that I put into my modules directly. It does not have content associated with it, or at least not directly embedded. I'm asking them to review the course as we're getting ready to get started, and I'm like, what is the main learning outcome? That one has a correct answer, but then I'm also asking questions like, which modules are most exciting to you? Which ones are most difficult to you, for you? Which ones do you think you're going to struggle? And so they up front we encourage them to read through the modules. So, hey, we have an overview of the course. We've encouraged them to read the syllabus because there's a couple things like, do you have any concerns about the AI policy in my course? Yes, no, maybe. And if a lot of them are like, yes, then you can open up a discussion on that and be like, okay, tell you what, we're going to have a discussion on the AI policy because I laid it out, but there were a lot of questions and people wanted to discuss it. I've created a discussion on the fly in module 1, posting an announcement or whatever for us to talk about the AI policy in class and what does ethical use of AI mean. Those types of things you can get at. Do the students feel like they understand? What are they feeling about the course? And also you could even use this to get a feel for where are you going to have to spend more time. Like if all of them agree that module 7 is the hardest and the most intimidating, you might, set aside some of your hobbies during module 7 to be able to come in and facilitate more actively the discussion. So a bunch of different ways to use polling, but there's just kind of this quick hit of like, what is my class feeling? Because this whole module outline can become sterile. It can be hard to understand. The students have progressed through things. What did they think about all of this? You could literally put content poll, content poll, content poll. That's obviously overkill, but if you can lace interactivity or activity throughout your course, be it in the reading or with the poll or in the discussion, it doesn't all have to happen in the discussion. You can accomplish the RSI guidelines inside of a social annotation document. And all of these are such a great way, at least today, to counteract ChatGPT. Because they have to read the content to know where to highlight something to be able to have that conversation. And as of today, ChatGPT can't do that. So it's kind of a nice way to use all these techniques to make the class more interactive, because then it's actually little pieces of interactivity that they have to come through and do. It's better from a learning outcome perspective, but it's also harder for ChatGPT.
I'm so
You're getting
glad you
all
mentioned.
excited over
I
there,
am.
Alex.
I'm all excited. I know. I'm very emotive.
You were
Sorry.
dancing.
I was dancing. I was so happy you brought up Chat GPT because I think that is so true. Like these things are very hard. Like, what are you going to do? Go put each of 5 polling questions in Chat GPT and like you could, but at that point you're better off just like answering the poll. And I have seen people suggest that social annotation is, of course, nothing is like AI proof, but like one of those things that is just a lot tougher to fake with AI. Like a traditional discussion, it's a lot easier to just be like, hey, AI, spit out my reply of an article at least. But if you have to be going in and like actually like anchoring these annotations in specific moments in the text and replying to people, it makes it harder to use the Chat GPT. It's not the
Harder
kind of
and
thing
better
you
for the students.
yeah, that's the thing. This is good for them. It's not like you're doing it just to evade Chat GPT. It's good learning science.
We are at time. We're actually 3 minutes past time, but Alex had to dance and say, so
I had
I
to
blame her.
dance. It's my fault. It's my fault. I got excited. Sorry,
All
guys.
right. I'm gonna actually go to our help site and grab the PDF annotation doc so that you actually have the instructions on how to do this for you. So I'm gonna put this out into the chat. So you have this here. And I think we have one on polling as well. Add a poll to your post, standalone polls in Canvas, Brightspace, Blackboard. Let me grab the Canvas one. But as you can see, you can just go to our help site and search for polling and all the articles are there. So this will walk you through step by step, getting one of these set up to start to play with as well. And we have little videos, sample videos, and for those to be able to get that rolling. So have fun, go add interactivity to your course, enjoy it. And let us know if you have any questions. You can always hit us up at support@harmonizelearning.com. I'm going to put that out in the chat. And then we will answer any questions you have as you're getting things set up. So. Awesome. Have fun, everybody. Go vote. I think I said that earlier, but I'm going to say it again. Go vote. It's important. And I hope you don't have too much anxiety tonight as the results come in. Take care, everybody.